Okay, good afternoon, folks. Jim Rovers here from AFIMAC. Thanks for taking time to join us today with our webinar series. We're going to get started here now, and certainly look forward to covering off the topic that we have here for today. So today's topic, it's part of our Ask the Experts webinar series. And what do you do when your union ignores a court injunction? So certainly it's a trend that we've been seeing in terms of court injunctions. And at this point in time, we want to just create some awareness and bring some things to your attention surrounding what's taking place. She's not able to hear you. Recently, and just a quick webinar outline here. Recently, unions have changed their tactics during labor unrest situations. So what's important is we used to rely on getting a court injunction, and we are finding in some instances those court injunctions are being defied. Management needs to consider this when planning for strikes. So again, we used to rely, and you'll hear the term as we process here, on the rule of law, and we have seen some defiance of that. It's not a broad trend. Certainly Unifor is the union that's driving that, but they've been very successful in 3 instances where this has taken place. So I would suspect that other unions will likely try the tactic, and what we hope to do today is cover that off and get into a little bit more detail as what that might mean to you. We've got a couple of recent examples of real situations that have taken place, and we'll discuss those in a little bit more details. Okay. Topics for today, recent examples of when unions disobey court injunctions. We're going to touch on Compass Minerals. So for some of you on the phone, Compass Minerals is formerly known as Sifto Salt in Goderich, Ontario, largest salt mine in the world. DJ Composites received national attention, so they had a strike that was beyond 200 days out on the east coast of Canada. That was also experienced the same sort of tactics taking place. I think what's also important, there was a health unit in Thunder Bay where this tactic of defying the injunction was also deployed by the union up there, and we didn't have time to cover it off in today's webinar, but certainly if you do any Google research on it, you'll find that those 3 are out there. Changing union tactics, so what happens when the union defies a court injunction, contingency planning, some additional considerations that you may need to consider, communication and what the union can do to your brand. And I think what's really important to touch on here is certainly traditional picket lines still exist, but the use of social media and other pressure tactics within the community and where your facilities are located, unions have really started to do a good job and step up their action to go after your brands in a more meaningful way. And then also safety and security considerations as a result of some of the things that we're seeing take place. So in terms of who we are, I'm going to turn it over to John Noble now and let him take the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. AFIMAC's been in the business for over 30 years. We're Canada's industry leader and largest single source provider for labor disruption services across Canada. We work with industries large and small, every kind of industry you could imagine: mining, milling, healthcare, education, manufacturing, you name it. We're certainly involved in assisting those companies prepare for business disruption. We have literally the largest contingency of industry experts under one roof to help not just in the planning stage, but also providing resources, picket line management, transportation, logistics, replacement workers, etc.
And I think what's important, just to tie a bow around that a little bit further, we are starting to get more and more work out of the public sector. So I think as the private sector's had to adjust, tighten their belt, and realign how they do things, some of that's creeping into the public sector. So we're seeing more and more work come from cities, municipalities, colleges, universities, as well as community living groups and things of that nature. So that also becomes an important part of the equation. My name's Jim Rovers. I'm Senior Vice President of Operations. Been with AFIMAC since 2004. and have worked with companies throughout the United States and Canada, helping them develop contingency plans surrounding labor disputes since that time. I'm going to turn it over to Blair Steele next. Adam Reed is a lucky guy, and he's currently away on vacation. So Blair's one of our internal experts that's joining us today. So Blair, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, folks. My name is Blair Steele. I'm the Regional VP of Crisis Mitigation. So basically, I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years. My first 8, I was a coordinator on the ground. So I'm not sure how many labor disputes that I actually coordinated, but the chances are it's between 40 to 60. Some as short as a week, some as long as 9 months. So prior to that, I served 24 years in the Canadian military, mostly in the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. So I have a good security background. Now for the last 12 years, I travel around the country and help companies prepare a plan in case they do have a labor dispute. Now I'm going to turn you over to John. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, good afternoon to me again. John Noble. I'm the Regional Vice President of Risk Mitigation for AFIMAC Canada. I've got over 150,000 actual field hours managing, coordinating actual labor disruptions, including several national strikes across Canada. I've got over 25 years experience in the labor disruption management business. Spend most of my day now assisting clients and potential clients prepare for labor disruptions across Canada. Skill set, very specific tactile communication, crowd management, conflict resolution type skills, and of course on the consulting, executive protection and labor disruption side of things.
So thank you, John and Blair. We'll move into the meat of it now. So Compass Minerals, to set the stage in a case example, so largest salt mine in the world, as mentioned earlier, located in Goderich, Ontario, approximately 400 members of Unifor. They had a strike that commenced in April of 2018. An injunction was granted, and this was as a result of some pretty excessive delays at the beginning, both at the site location as well as at the marshalling yard. And the marshalling yard, for those who are not familiar with that terminology, is where items were being shunted from into the site, as well as their transportation hub for people moving to and from the site. The injunction read a 4-minute delay per vehicle with a total delay of no more than 12 minutes, meaning that if you were the 10th car in line and your delay was longer than 12 minutes, all vehicles within that crossing moved in. So in some instances, we had 20, 30 vehicles crossing in a 12-minute time span, and then the time would reset back to the beginning. That was based on the evidence that we had gathered of the delays, of the obstructions, and then also, obviously, the important component here was the work that was done by their labor attorneys to get that injunction in place. So they operated with that injunction in place and functioning for quite some time. A bit more to the story here, the mine was operating. They had brought in some new continuous mining equipment. They were struggling to find the efficiencies that they needed to out of the equipment, and they had brought in a mining company out of the East Coast that had some expertise in that equipment, and they were assisting management and supporting them with getting operations up and functioning. On July 2018, the union elected to defy the court injunction. They placed wooden barricades across the site entrance. And when I say wooden barricades, pallets, pieces of wood, lumber, totally sealing off the entrance to the site. There was only one way into the site, and the only other way was by water, and they had effectively, for the most part, blocked the water route off, so the only real way in was by small watercraft. The judge had ordered that the barricades be removed after a court appearance. The union had said that they would not remove the barricades until management agreed to meet with them and bargain. The union removed the barricades as a result of the court proceedings, however, immediately reestablished barricades using heavy equipment, farm machinery, trailers, and other obstacles. So the tactic on the union's part was we definitely followed the court's orders. We obeyed the order to remove the wooden barricades. However, they immediately replaced them and said that they weren't aware of who was bringing in the heavy equipment of the farm machinery, and there were other supporters that they had no control over. The impact of this is you have a management team, you have a contract mining team that's helping out on site. You also have security as well as a host of other vendors that could not get on or off the site during that period. So although we were using sea-doos to bring in a small amount of water, food, fuel, we were essentially blockaded in and had very restrictive access to maintain on-site. Shift changes were not allowed for any of the personnel that needed to get off-site, and in some instances there was people on-site for in excess of 72 to 96 hours during that period. The judge ordered the OPP to enforce the injunction, but what's important here is the union's pressure tactics did force management back to the table, did force them to negotiate, and did force them to concede on some issues that they had hoped to move forward with, and that was only out of concern for their well-being of their employees, contractors, and other partners that were helping them out. So, as you can see in that example, certainly the pressure tactic it did work, and certainly what we tried to highlight here is an injunction was granted. In most situations up until that point, the injunctions were followed. You have the odd hiccup here or there sometimes, but not an outright total blockade of the site. So a little bit of context there for you. DJ Composites, they're an aerospace manufacturing company out in Gander, Newfoundland, approximately 30 employees, members of Unifor. They had been locked out for 21 months. Most of you may have been familiar because there was a lot of backlash. They started posting the pictures of temporary workers. Most of those workers, by the way, were workers that worked for the company who had elected to come back to work cross picket lines. There was a lot of backlash in the media and online because there was certainly a heightened situation that was unfolding and developing, and tensions were rising very, very high in terms of who these people were, where they lived, and away go that way. So certainly from an organization standpoint, as well as the public, that was sort of a, if I use the word, a new low, and even those amongst the labor community that were more moderate even took some dislike to what had taken place. Blockade was erected at the site. Temporary fence was placed around the site by the union to block management's access. So if you can imagine this, a fencing contractor is contracted, shows up and erects a fence around property that the client is responsible for, and certainly creates a situation where, again, the employees' management are locked in. They're not letting anything in or out. Unifor did fly in approximately 200 activists from around the country to support in locking that down. Needless to say, most of the individuals flown in were pretty hardcore union activists, which also added to the mix there. Management did agree to arbitration as a result of what was taking place. In the end, Unifor was ordered to pay $160,000 in fines for violating the court injunction. Union leaders were also ordered to apologize to the Newfoundland Labrador Supreme Court, and the union did have to admit that they violated the court injunction from 2017. The management group in this particular case did donate all the money from the fines to a cause or a charity in the area. Needless to say, they did go to arbitration. A settlement was reached. So again, the pressure tactic did result in what the union had hoped to achieve. As a result of, and as of the latest news release on that, a large quantity, and I believe it's almost 50% of the workers have yet to return to work. So certainly the impact of the strike and locking it down had some impact on volumes at customer work, and I'm sure some of that work was displaced elsewhere. Okay, so that covers the case examples off. Certainly the goal was just to bring awareness to you, and certainly it's a tactic that worked on 2 occasions, so we suspect it will be tried again in the future. I'm going to just address this next slide off. So certainly the changing tactics we've touched on already, that we assume the rule of law will be followed. And I think what's important here is we need to, as we develop plans, or you as in companies develop plans, look at that what-if scenario. What if they don't honor the injunction? What if they honor it for a period of time and choose to defy it at a later date? Are you prepared on site? What does that mean? And both Blair and John are going to talk about that a little bit further. Your legal representatives will also need to prepare contingencies that in the event that a court order has been defied. You're going to have to consider what to do if the police, when orders aren't followed, and what they may be able to do. I can certainly speak to the Compass scenario, and the police's approach was very much hands-off. And did not really want to roll up their sleeves and get involved in that. What additional evidence might you require to move the process along, and what are you going to need to do based on your blockade? And explore fines, legal options for the loss of revenue and impact on your business. Will you, in some cases, need to take civil action against those that are blocking your entrance, and as a means to move the process along, and certainly get blockades removed, and then certainly respected. So from a contingency planning considerations, I'm now going to turn it over to John Noble, and he's going to walk through some of the things that you probably should consider based on this new reality. John, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so a few years ago, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations. The environment around labor disruption had kind of mellowed a little bit. The inconvenience was just that. But what we're seeing is quite a change in the trend and within the industry. Social media has made it so much easier for unionized folks to mobilize people, to take action quickly, to spread the necessary propaganda, for instance, to rally the troops in support of their cause, accurate or not. So it's important that you have some additional contingency planning in place. The old saying, failing to plan is certainly going to mean failure on your part. The most important aspect of building your contingency plan is providing safety. That's number one for everybody involved, your staff, employees, and also securing your site and assets. And then to add a third spin to that, obviously, is to protect your brand and image within the community and within the media. So the one important piece is certainly to do a proper site assessment of your facility to make sure that the fencing and lighting is all in good repair, that any vulnerabilities, whether it's natural gas, electricity, things of that nature, are well protected. If you're unable to protect those with the physical nature, then you'll certainly have to consider adding additional security personnel to your site. I should add that one of the most important pieces, and we're finding ourselves doing this more and more often, is to make sure that you have the means in place to monitor social media so that you can prepare yourself well in advance, and to make sure that you have the information that can, in a lot of cases, head off those type of situations, or allow you to prepare yourself. And it may mean locking down the site and not having anybody come in on that specific day. We have the ability to do that internally, and are finding ourselves being able to dig in deep into the internet and head off a lot of incidents before they occur. So it's important that you have that in place. Additional provisions you should have in place in the event that your folks, staff are locked in on site. Food, bedding, beverages. Do you have the equipment in place to prepare meals? Certainly just the standards of living, running water, shower facilities, food. It may be 72 hours. Certainly you should be prepared for a minimum of that. It does take a process sometimes for the union to make their point. One of the tactics that, we also need to look at is the making sure that the union can't, access your facility and occupy. Certainly when a level of frustration gets involved, an injunction has been placed, they get desperate, and one of their options would be, rather than a blockade, but to come in and occupy the cafeteria until the union gets back to the table. And I've seen that deployed and experienced that type of attempt on a few occasions. Certainly you need to assess how long you can house your folks on site, replacement workers, your staff. Certainly essential folks, you may have a boiler system or certain processes that you need to keep running, provide safety for not just the folks within the site, but also maybe the neighborhood and surrounding area that you're in. Sleeping quarters and bedding, that could be just cots and sleeping bags tucked in a room in the event of. Certainly a need to address things like medical emergencies. Make sure that you're doing security briefings and with your staff and make sure that they're carrying extra supply of medicine and medications and things of that nature to get them through, 72 hours or more on that end of it. Supplies to maintain your critical operations that I had touched on earlier. And then, of course, a list of who would remain on site under those circumstances. It's important, who you need, the skills and the qualifications to run certain equipment, and then have the means to be locked down. Certain employees and staff may have commitments outside the facility that would be very difficult for them, and those are decisions that you can make ahead of time in the event that something like this is developing and brewing.
And certainly, just to add on to that, certainly John and Blair and I have, and myself have been at this a long time. If you look back to the 80s and 90s, getting a court injunction was a very difficult thing. It's almost a speed bump in terms of a process now and what needs to be gathered. So I think my message to anybody on the phone call is certainly you don't want to create mass hysteria, but we need to move away from planning around best case scenarios and sort of look at, as John said, what are we going to do if site A, we find ourselves with those employees locked down? It isn't going to be for weeks or months, but again, I think that rule of thumb is it's going to take 72 hours to get through a potential situation. Some sites have the luxury of multiple entrances. We've done some work certainly in industries that have that. But again, I think good site assessment, good contingency plans, and take that into consideration. Okay? So communication, what can the union do to your brand? So message to employees and families. Certainly if you look at a lot of the stuff that's floated out in the community, you're really into a Hearts and Minds campaign. John touched on social media. Certainly we see a lot on U.S. television where issues get polarized and inflamed. So certainly make sure you're not only communicating to the rank and file folks that work at your site, but also employees, families, things of that nature. Notification to your key stakeholders. So the last thing you want is whether that be contractors, board members, investors, finding out about you've got a crisis on your hands, and they're reading about it on Facebook, Twitter, or away you go that way. You need some way to put out mass or emergency notifications, so whether that be email, text messages. I will say this, and certainly John and Blair and I have talked about this, I think people ignore email nowadays. We've become so bombarded that you've got people that you're saying, please don't report to this site, or here's what we need to do, or please prepare for this, and it's just not happening. So text messaging is sort of becoming the new norm. Protection of your brand, certainly if we look at the recent General Motors example, there's a clear example that I don't think any of us anticipated the outright targeting of the brand itself. And I think we're probably going to see more and more of don't buy this, don't shop for this, and away go that way. The story's yet to be told on how that will play out. Does it have an impact on General Motors? Does it have an impact on consumers? But I think we need to bring your attention that the union is more apt than not and feel that they're prepared and need to go there. Your external communications with the press obviously become important. I think, though, let's look at the new reality is there's a lot of citizen reporting going on, and that gets done on social media platforms. And I would say this, certainly the stuff that I see come out of a lot of communications is not reality-based, and it's not even true, and you're going to have to build something to circumvent some of that. Prepare messages in advance of a blockade. And John mentioned social media earlier. A lot of the calls we get is, hey, we're 2 days into an event, we're 3 days into an event, what can you do? And I think really there's lots that can be done, but intelligence gathering starts further out from when the event takes place, and that becomes very important to have a look at. Remember, at the end of the day, this is a hearts and minds campaign. You're not only dealing with your employees and families, in some cases you're dealing with a town, a community, local politicians, and you've got a lot of things going on that are sort of tugging at it. Certainly also keep in mind that if you're within an election cycle, within an area, province, or if it's federally regulated, you're going to get lots of visits and lots of airtime for politicians looking to grab onto the issue and away go that way. And as I mentioned, the greater community at large. So I would suggest that picket lines still do occur, blockades still do occur, aggressive picketing does occur from time to time, but more importantly, the union is going to come at your brand from a million different angles that they wouldn't have done in the past. If you think about it, there's often strikes that occurred that were large in nature, that if you talk to somebody that you ran into and said, have you heard about this or that, before the era of social media, they had no idea that it was taking place, and now it's playing out on social media and the TV sets. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Blair now to talk about some of the safety and security concerns.
Yeah, hi again. The safety and security concerns, if you do have a blockade up, first of all, will additional security be required? Even prior to that, and both John and Jim hit this right on the head there. Social media is paramount. You should be looking at it prior to your contract end date or strike date, and you should be looking at it if a strike occurs. What you want to do is you should be meeting with the coordinator on a daily basis, and he is going to give you lots of pieces of the puzzle, what they're talking about, what their routine is. Management will also have people that they know on the outside that is going to feed them some information. So you should be able to join that information, and it should be able to get a nice picture for you along with the social media. So when they do a blockade, you got to look at routines that's happening at the strike line. So when the routine starts breaking, you know that something else is coming up in their in basket, I guess. So and you should be prepared for that. So you may need additional security if that happens, and it depends on your location where the picket lines are being assembled. There's lots to play in there. Do you have provisions for house security on site? The same with management, replacement labor, and Jim took you back to Compass Minerals there, and they were out for quite a bit of time, and they were feeling powerless. The replacement labor was coming in and out, jobs were being done, product was being taken out of the mine and being shipped. So after a certain while, it's no surprise, they have to do something else because the union is losing their membership, less people are showing up, and they're getting desperate. So now you know what's going to happen. So at that stage, and it depends on your industry and what you need, but you should be looking at, room for kitchens, is there bedding here? What happens if they do put a blockade? Do you still have enough people that can actually do the job and get the product done? Because, you still want them to remain powerless. But at the same token, you want to keep shooting for the line. You want to keep trying to bring people in because that's the evidence you're going to need. How will evidence be gathered and transmitted during a blockade? And there, we like to be able to connect with your lawyers direct, and your lawyers will say, you know what, this is what we need. This is the evidence we need. So that's exactly what we're going to get for them. And legal has to advise, again, on the critical information they require, and that should be them and security talking back and forth, and also management, because there's lots of evidence that you're going to have to provide. You're losing money, your position in the marketplace, your brand, all them stuff is very important. Again, we'll talk about probing picket lines. Just because they put a blockade up, don't stop probing the lines. You got to keep, that's the evidence you need to do. And you got to keep calling the police, asking the police to directly help you get vehicles across. That's the evidence that your lawyers are going to be looking for. The union, and they've done this a couple times in bringing in their security. One of the first things I would do, depends on where their security is set up, I would phone the Ministry of of Security, and they're supposed to be able to be on private property. Security investigators can be out in public, but they can't interact. They're just to shoot video there. So just so you're aware that they could put security out there also. Communication and documentation with police, and I touched on that just a little bit earlier, but the police have got to be called every time that a vehicle or a person is held up at a picket line, usually a vehicle of any type. Video has to be shot. You have to ask, security have to ask directly for the police to help with getting the vehicle across. Now, safety and management, salary and temporary workers. While they're at the line, if there's an unsafe act, you get them out of there. You get the police in, you get the evidence that you need, but you still have to bring them back a little while later. It depends on the situation here. But extra security resources may be required at that time.
And then just to add on the testimony piece for a moment, and I'll bring you back to the Compass situation. We were even having difficulty having security people released from the site who had gathered the evidence, and the lawyers wanted to testify. And did we get them out at the end of the day? The answer is yes. However, you've got somebody who's been awake for 3 days straight because we didn't have a shift coming in replacing them, and the union certainly dragged it out. So there was no prep time on the lawyer, like very little prep time with the lawyers, and that was a tactic the union deployed is, okay, where's your witnesses if we could only get them out? And then, yes, you can get them out, but we're not allowing you to let anybody to come in to replace them. So you're in a conundrum at the site. Well, if I release the security and I don't have security here to testify, if this doesn't go our way, how are we going to get security back on? So that becomes a part of the equation. So go ahead, Blair.
No, I'm done now. Turning it over to you now.
Okay, so conclusions. Will this trend continue? Who knows? Certainly it's worked in 3 instances, so I suggest it probably will. Will other unions adopt the tactics? Certainly we've seen OPSU, CUPE, and Unifor make some statements that they're joining forces. They're strategizing on different action plans and game plans. So I think there's some coordination in the background. Will management need to consider civil action to recover costs? And I raise that. I've had some employers say, you know, I don't think we really want to go after our employees, but at the end of the day, if rule of law is not being followed, it's a spot you probably don't want to go, but you may have to do that. And certainly, Blair and I've worked on some projects where that indeed has taken place. Can you terminate employees for strike-related misconduct? Certainly, that can take place. It is a tactic. The union will try to get amnesty for those workers at the end of the day. My message there would be, and we did a project for fairly large amount of people. They were not necessarily following court injunctions and things of that nature. That resulted in a handful of employees being terminated for strike-related misconduct. And the overarching message there was, we can't really control those handful of people because they're quite radical. But what it did do was it really put a lid on a simmering pot with others. So most people are just good, hard-working, everyday people that come to work and do their things and don't want to get wrapped up in some of the games or shenanigans. You know, at the end of that particular situation there, management did agree with the terminations to go to arbitration. The union asked that those cases be heard individually, or sorry, as a group. Management said no. Each incident will be heard on their own. And they did reach a settlement prior to arbitration because obviously the cost was going to get quite excessive, and away to go that way. AFIMAC can certainly assist you with providing a contingency planning guide. We've got Blair and John here, who are our risk mitigation specialists, who can get out to sites and certainly help you build plans and work on those plans, and certainly provide guidance and expertise from that perspective. So I'm going to turn it back over to John for a moment just to talk, or sorry, Blair for a moment, just a high level talk about what it is we can do, and then we'll wrap this up. So from a service level perspective.
Yeah, it's Blair here again. If you're calling us at about 5 days before you're end of your contract, or after your conciliator was come in and a no board was issued, we can still help you prepare, but it's going to be hasty, and all you're doing is it's stopping the flames. You should be contacting us 4 to 6 months prior to your end of your contract, so you can go through the process of planning. And what we can do for you there is not only will we help you with your planning process, if you did have a labor dispute, we would supply security and investigators so that you have the proper evidence gathered for an injunction process. If we would provide transportation for your management, so they're getting across safely. There's people that are the bargaining unit members are still your employees, so you still want to treat them well, but you also want to treat your management and salary workers well that are crossing the line. You want to make sure that they can safely cross the line. They're in groups, and they can do it, let's say, in a van or a bus, rather than their own personal cars, because it's going to be more economical for you, and also safety for them. So we can provide that services. We can provide a trucking service, like a shunting. What we would do is take raw product in, finished product out, and just go to a drop-off point where your normal trucking company will carry it to their destination. Most of them, even if they're non-union, will still do that. They just don't want to cross the line. So that service we can provide. We can provide replacement labor. If you're going to operate using replacement labor, we would need at least 30 working days, and that's working days. to get you the proper replacement labor to be able to help you run your plant. Now, the better job classifications, you know, equipment, education, the more knowledge you give us, the better replacement you're going to have in the end. So basically what I'm saying is there's nothing that we can't do for you. Years ago, we did a strike for, we did a labor dispute for a client that wanted engineers and a brakeman. Now, very hard to find an engineer and a brakeman, but we went out of province to get that, and the person was a union member, and he just went on vacation for a while because money talks. You know what I mean? As long as, if you need them that bad, then everything can be done, but there's a price to it. All right? There was another location that wanted a helicopter. We bring in a helicopter and bring it out with their senior management, and they just wanted to send a message. So again, there's nothing that we can't do. Usually, if you have a labor dispute, once it goes, you should be doing a threat analysis of all your employees, who's liable to do something to themselves, to others, whether it's acts of violence or sabotage. And we can actually, once the strike goes and they miss about 3 paychecks, that's when you're going to see if it's required. But we can provide protection agents for a certain management that will be targeted. So basically you can see there's nothing we can't do. I'm just going to turn it over to John, see if he's got a couple points to add.
Yeah, no, Blair covered it. We're basically, for lack of a better term, one-stop shop when it comes to labor disruption services. Not a lot that we haven't seen, not a lot of resource that we don't have or have access to. My closing remarks would be it's critical that you focus some time and energy on planning. We probably contract with, you know, over 100 folks across Canada each year. We might end up doing 20 labor disruptions, so that's a lot of plans for naught. But those 20 folks that did plan are sure happy that they did. Just on my end, I really appreciate you folks taking the time for today, and I'll pass it back to Jim for closing remarks.
So thanks, folks. Glad you joined. If you have any questions, certainly the contact information is up here. Feel free to reach out to any of us. Again, lots of years of experience, and again, John sort of summarized and hit it right on the head. Plan, 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 plan. Too many times we find that if there is a plan, it's a plan A, and your plan might need plan A, plan B, and plan C, or some variation of that, and that would be our message here today. So thanks again. Appreciate you spending some time with us here today, and look forward to connecting with all of you in the future at some point. Thank you.